I recognize the senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, today stands out as a critical moment for the country, the Supreme Court, and the Constitution. In recent weeks, Trump administration officials and allies have made statements and engaged in troubling conduct that threaten judicial independence and our very system of government. Elon Musk, a senior advisor to President Trump, has repeatedly called for the impeachment of federal judges whose decisions he disagrees with, and he's questioned the lifetime appointment of federal judges that is enshrined in Article 3 of our Constitution. In a social media post, Vice President J.D. Vance falsely asserted that, quote, judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power, end of quote. This is merely the latest in a long line of claims by the Vice President that a President of the United States can defy the orders of the court. In 2021, Mr. Vance went so far as to say he would suggest to President Trump that, quote, when the court stops you, stand before the country like Andrew Jackson did and say, the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it. This was an obvious reference to the apocryphal story about President Andrew Jackson, suggesting he would defy the Supreme Court ruling. And President Donald Trump himself recently posted, and I quote, he who saves his country does not violate any law. Let me repeat that personal post by the President. He who saves his country does not violate any law. Mr. President, those 10 words are a rationale for tyranny and are an assault on our Constitution. This disregard for judicial review has not been limited to words alone. In multiple cases, administration officials have dragged their feet or failed to comply with federal court orders. The administration has also nominated individuals to senior positions at the Department of Justice who seem to have little regard for separation of powers. One Trump nominee recently testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee and said, and I quote, there is no hard and fast rule about whether in every instance a public official is bound by a court decision, end of quote. Fortunately, my colleague, Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, admonished this nominee, and he said, and I quote, don't ever take the position that you're not going to follow the order of the court, ever. Now you can disagree with it within the bounds of legal ethics. You can criticize it, you can appeal it, or you can resign, end of quote. And it's only the executive, isn't only the executive branch that has threatened the independence of the judiciary. In the past month, 3 members of the House of Representatives have introduced articles of impeachment against federal judges for no reason other than they ruled against this administration. These actions and comments constitute a clear and present danger to the separation of powers and our Constitution. Instead of favorably quoting the apocryphal words of Andrew Jackson, our political leaders and their allies should reference the words of Chief Justice Marshall in Marbury versus Madison, an 1803 decision. As we all learned in law school, Judge Marshall said, and I quote, it is emphatically the province and duty of the Judicial Department to say what the law is, end of quote. There has been a broad bipartisan consensus on that point for more than 2 centuries when it comes to interpreting and applying the law. The judiciary has the final word. Last week on this floor, I tried to pass a Senate resolution simply affirming the rule of law and finality of judicial review. I thought and hoped every senator would support it. Regrettably, a Republican senator objected, and the Senate missed an opportunity to say with one voice that we support the Constitution and judicial branch. Thankfully, the judicial branch has demonstrated its independence even without the support of the other branches of government. Judges have carefully considered the cases before them, and in some cases provided a check on the administration when it overstepped. For that, I commend the judiciary. Alexander Hamilton called the Article 3 judiciary, the courts, quote, the least dangerous branch, close quote, because it has neither soldiers nor money to enforce its decrees. That's why the court's legitimacy in the eyes of the American people is so critical to its continued vitality. And that's why I continue to support an enforceable code of conduct for the Supreme Court. Recent efforts by the Trump administration and its allies to intimidate and impeach federal judges have been based on those judges' decisions and the president who appointed them. In contrast, an enforceable code of conduct would apply to all justices equally, no matter who appointed them and no matter how they rule on a particular matter. I first proposed that the court adopt an enforceable code of conduct 13 years ago in 2012, prior to the existence of the court's current conservative supermajority and prior to many of its controversial decisions. The fact that many sitting justices have publicly endorsed an enforceable code of conduct underscores that it does not pose a threat to the independence of the judicial branch. An enforceable code of conduct would bolster public confidence in the judicial branch. And by ensuring the judiciary is held in high regard, we can ensure that the so-called least dangerous branch of government maintains a position of strength now and in the future. Mr. President, I yield the floor.